Welcome everyone back to Pommy and Oz channel, and I'm joined by, I'd say probably an inspiration of why I'm here, first of all, but he is a YouTube icon, and I don't often say that on this show. I've got the great man himself, host of True Footy, and also True Eagle, if you are a West Coast Eagle fan. West Coast Eagle super connoisseur, Jesse joins me. How are you doing, my friend?
Very well, thank you, Pommy. This is historic. This is the last ever piece of content I'll do in the UK. So that's fun, but I'm good. That was probably the most incredible introduction I've ever had. A super connoisseur of West Coast is a fantastic title that we're going to run with now. But it's good to be here, mate.
Mate, well, I mean, obviously, I'm Pomming Oz. You're Aussie in Pom. Like, big last moment. He's just opened a coffee, these last coffee. You'll be back here. Suppose first thing, what is it like for Aussies here watching your team a million miles away? That's like, to me, I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. It's been a good time to be away from the West Coast Eagles, frankly, with the performances over the last 18. Oh, it's been longer than that. What am I talking about? But yeah, being a footy fan here is it's okay. Like, we've had some 4 a.m. wake ups to watch the Eagles get trolloped by 100 points. I don't even know if that's a word, but we're going to run with it. Yeah, so there's been a few bleak days, but being a full-time creator means it's easier to justify getting up at 4 a.m. to watch my team lose because it's also part of the workday. And yeah, it's actually been a really fun experience. I mean, you're someone, if I'm not mistaken, gets up to watch Man United games, and that's not your job. So the dedication on your part is more impressive than mine. But yeah, it is weird to think that I came here and became a full-time AFL YouTuber. But starting next season, I'll be back in Western Australia, and it'll feel a bit different.
Well, it's been quite the roller coaster, hasn't it, West Coast, last year? Obviously, the great Adam Simpson, he stepped down in... I think probably it was obvious it was going to happen, but it was quite higgledy-piggledy done. It was like just suddenly overnight, and he didn't want to coach the final game. You had an interim, you've now got McQualter. How's that been for an Eagles fan? Like, did that it felt like you needed a breath of fresh air, didn't it, West Coast? It did feel like you kind of needed to rip the Band-Aid off.
Well, yeah, 100%. I think as a fan, I've always liked Simo, and I think there was a part of me that wanted his comeback story. I wanted him to overcome all the doubts, because I think he was more than capable. But I think it just got to a point with the negativity, certainly outside the club, and it sounded like it got inside the club, built up to a point where we probably needed that fresh start, which subsequently happened. We had Jared Schofield, and now we've got McQualter. So look, my thoughts on Simo kind of reflected how the board went with it. I was loyal. Then there was the poor results extended so long that I just thought, Simo, I'm sure you can turn this around, but we've got to change this. And subsequently, the board made its decision around that time as well. So it's a kind of it is a sort of unique experience for me. I've never seen a coach get sacked because Woosha technically stood down. It's a little bit sad. These people are Eagles people, and he's a premiership coach, and I love the guy for what he achieved for us. But now, I've got a good vibe on McQualter. I think he seems likable. We trust him already, and you should feel that about any new coach, really. But I'm positive about where we're looking from now. But it is sad to see Simo, not in the seat anymore.
Well, I mean, the results weren't probably what you want when you are a fan, but I suppose we would be amiss to talk about the highlight of last year, and that was Harley Reid's debut year. He's big time. Like, we don't often hear about Western clubs in Australia, in Melbourne. We forget that there is other clubs here, but Harley Reid is like literally on every cover of the Herald Sun. It's all anyone talks about. And would it be fair to say probably the first big Australian-wide superstar since Benny Cousins?
Possibly, yeah. I mean, in Western Australia, we certainly had Nick Nat. I don't know if he was on Harley Reid level of fame, though, in terms of like nationwide reach. Probably the fact that, Nick's West Australian. So we drafted a West Australian. He became, an icon. And that's kind of something West Coast has always had, pre-Ben Cousins, it was pre-Nick Nat, it was Ben Cousins. We also had Chris Judd. Like, there's always been some sort of iconic West Coast player, but I don't know if it's a sign of the times or a reflection of just how good Harley is for his age. Probably a bit of both. That Harley is probably the most like famous across the entire country of any player we've had for a long time.
Well, I mean, I think one thing that made me smile is when you look at teams that are struggling, you're looking for that fight, and it's not often we see young players show that fight. It's usually if you look at my club, Carlton, we destroyed Mark Murphy's career because we bled him dry. Cripps miraculously has survived that tenure. But watching Harley Reid throw superstars around with the young guys around him as well, that must have shown a little bit of hope for you that the future's bright. There was some great performances. Elijah Hewitt, he looked pretty good as well and looked like he was going to be physical. I do feel like your core, when you look at North Melbourne and Richmond, is far superior as a core of young players.
I'll take that. Look, Harley's a game changer when you consider like list builds, when you go for a team that's at the bottom of the ladder. I think the first thing you look for is like, what's the group of 4 to 6 to 8 players that are going to take us forward? And Harley Reid into this West Coast team is a game changer in terms of the way we assess the core. I think it's starting to come together now. And I think it has really vindicated the decision not to trade the pick 12 months ago when it was much talked about. Now, there's always a chance, he leaves, but from a purely footballing decision, Harley is such a game changer. And now it's about how do we support Harley with talent around him? How do we protect him so he's not, doing too much on his own? The way he played this season just blew me away. I've never seen anything like that before, where he just doesn't look like he needs protection. He's an 18-year-old, was an 18-year-old, now 19, just raising the standard of everyone around him. We've seen flashes of that with 18-year-olds before. And I suppose you could say, look, Dacos and Sheasel, they do that. But Harley does it in a much more physical sense. So it's just been an absolute pleasure to watch, no doubt, as an Eagles fan. But yeah, in terms of our long-term projections, now we just got to think, how do we support Harley? And, if he stays with us long enough, hopefully we win a flag.
It's funny because the go-home factor is, ironically, Victorians. We always say in Victoria, it's, don't draft a WA boy, don't draft a Queensland boy, they'll want to go home. But you actually look at it as a core average, it's usually Victorians that want to go. I always think of it this way, though. When across the AFL landscape, Perth fans, West Coast Eagles fans particularly, are probably the closest to Melbourne fans. They are manic about their club. It's very passionate. It's massively followed. And it is a huge club. And I always look at it as a foreigner. It's like playing in England for Man United, but then Real Madrid come in for you. Like, it's still pretty big. It might not be home and you can't have Nana's Yorkshire puddings, but it's still life-changing. And West Coast, you've named some legends. It's still a huge club. And for Harley, he's probably going to be, I think it's a shortcut to having a statue staying at West Coast Eagles.
Yeah, well, I hope so. Excuse me. Look, West Coast's retention across the board has always been really strong. Generally speaking, we don't lose players. And in fact, I reckon the data would suggest we've lost more South Australians than anything else. So there's a lot to be confident about from that point of view. And I don't think Harley is the sort of kid who just wants to play at home necessarily. And I think he's a loyal guy. On the other hand, we are talking about a potential generational talent. And I think he's going to have more opportunity and more offers than any other player in the league, just about. And, clubs like Geelong, where there's some sort of natural link there. He was a Cats fan. And then, the big Victorian clubs, he's just going to have so many opportunities that it's hard to lock in with full confidence that I think he's going to stay. I don't think he's going to leave at the end of his first contract. But I think one day down the track, once he's a free agent, regardless of how well we're going, regardless of how loyal he is, it's just hard to. It'd be like dating a supermodel and being like, no, I think she's going to be loyal. But what if, I don't know, what if Bailey Smith slides into her DMs? Like, it's just hard to lock that in, So fingers are crossed.
No, I agree with you. And I mean, the other guy that really did stand out was the coming of age of Jake Waterman. Like, so much so that you upped and packed Jack Darlington off. Waterman looked sensational, didn't he, last year? And obviously Oscar Allen finally managed to play decent amount of games as well. He looked like it's another year of development for him coming into his prime. That must excite you though, because Waterman, he's that awkward size, isn't he? But he was just a goal thief at times.
His story is quite inspirational too. Like, he had a career-threatening illness going into the off season, so 12 months ago, and there was doubts he was going to play at all in 2024, let alone maybe ever again. And for him to be coming back in the preseason and winning the fitness tests or whatever I don't know what it's called now, but the equivalent of like the B tests, it's got a different name now. Winning the running drills, I was like, oh wow, that's kind of wild. And then for him to put the season in he did has just been inspiring. And he's like Darling in the sense that they're both undersized. They're both about 190, 191, and yet have developed the physical. Waterman has developed the physical strength where he can just be one out and take a contested grab, despite being the shorter bloke. And he's also got great running capacity, and he's great in front of goal. And it's just been a perfect storm and one of the most surprising breakout seasons from a West Coast player that I've ever seen. Usually with a lot of our guns over the years, we've seen it coming. And it's not that I didn't think Jake was good at all, but his ascension to what he became this year was just outstanding and a very welcome rise to power. We needed something like that.
Well, he's obviously set the standard. Well-deserved All-Australian as well. I know there was a lot of comments, oh, you can't give it to him. And my argument was he's playing for one of the bottom three sides. And
yes,
you see him on page one of the Coleman medal. Like, he's literally feeding on scraps. If you put him in Geelong's forward line, he could have maybe brought the ton. So I love that for you. But your off-season, we've talked about it a lot on this show, and Carlton were heavily involved with you. And I thought you had to do a lot of work, and I thought this draft was the best draft with the depth to bring in talent. You did trade pick 3 out. I hated it at the time. I do now think you've had the best off-season, though, you could possibly have. How did you view the off-season? Because you were everywhere, weren't you? There was Barras, there was Baker, there was pick 3. Like, you were the talk of the town throughout the draft and trade period.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a busy one. I'm not going to lie. Like, I was one of the vocal Eagles fans, not the most vocal. There was a lot, but when the pick 3 deal went through, I can't sit here and say that I didn't criticize it and that I was happy with it, only to now be like, yeah, no, I think we won the off season. So from the perspective of trying to be balanced about this, one thing that did make me feel better about the pick 3 trade was just looking at how. First of all, the other work that we did, like it necessitated trading that pick to get the Liam Baker deal done. And when you look at the offseason holistically, the total sum of what we did, stacks up fairly well. But I was saying as well, like, we're kind of vindicated by the fact that it was extremely hard to deal picks in the first round this year. You have to look at North Melbourne, what they did. Look, they're in a different phase to us. They don't prioritize the draft as much as we do. But if you just look at, that was the going rate for pick 27 this year, albeit it was live. North Melbourne offered what could be a top 3 pick next year. And, if we believe what Kaltumi writes, which I do, that, they tried to trade from everyone from St Kilda down. There was just no appetite to trade out this year. West Coast just had, multiple things going at once, and we needed to get Liam Baker done before the Tom Barras deal. And looking at the whole offseason holistically, we've addressed some needs. We didn't address every single need we have, but to be honest, that was probably an impossible task with the list that we had going into this offseason. So I think generally speaking, we're really happy, and it's, made it look a little bit better. The fact that Bo Allen fell that far, that was something that did not even seem possible the day before the draft. I didn't even really consider it in my pre-draft videos. I was like, nah, we're not getting Bo. So the draft fell our way. I'm really happy with Allen and Shanahan, and generally speaking, I don't think anyone could say West Coast haven't been aggressive. You can criticize the moves, but we've done a lot to try and improve what was a terrible list last year.
I agree. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and lie and say I like the trade. I might be the only Carlton fan who I link Nick Austin to Logan Paul and his crypto scam. I was like, it's an absolute disgrace that he's done that, and I hope he's investigated. But I did say you guys had to get it right in the draft, and I'm blown away at your draft because just quietly, I do love the Jack Graham free agency as well. I think he's that perfect 26 to 28-year-old player you need to protect. But Bo Allen and Job Shanahan, who were two top 15 in a lot of people's mock drafts at 16 and 30, I thought you cleaned up there, absolutely cleaned up.
Yeah, no, very happy because there was discussion that we might take Shanahan with our first, and you never know, like pre-draft, what's real and what's not. Like, were West Coast actually going to take Shanahan? Or was that to spook someone else? We don't know, but we know that West Coast liked Shanahan. I did read that West Coast. This is big footy stuff, but we rated them 12 and 14 on our draft board, so I'm sure West Coast were very happy it panned out that way. And Shanahan, in my opinion, and I did say this pre-draft, it's not me just being enough, but in my opinion, I just felt there was something different about Shanahan. I think he can be a very good player at AFL level. And to get him at 30, even though we don't really need talls, particularly key forwards, that's like the one area we're pretty well stocked for. I think the talent exceeded the cost there. I think it was just a case of this underpriced asset at pick 30 being available. We've taken him. And who knows, he might start round one of the team in the back line and play an intercepting game. He's probably the most exciting pick out of the ones we got.
You know what's fascinating is when I did my mocks as well, I liked him more than Armstrong. And I didn't think he was a little bit, because he could do both back and forward. We do see in the draft, this kills players. Like, because it's almost like this manager like, can't possibly be both. I said it in draft night. I wonder, because I think you're desperate for a key defender, his skill, his speed, his ball use, and his ability overhead. There is a guy at your football club with these similar skills without probably the athleticism as an 18-year-old, and that's Jeremy McGovern. Do you see Job maybe being trialled and learning his craft down the back?
I certainly think we need it in terms of, like, as you identified there, a need for a key back prospect was something we needed this year, and we didn't end up pulling the trigger. On Shanahan in particular, I do see the ability to go back. I'm hopeful that we explore that. And I do think it's probably his best avenue into the team. We've got another talented guy called Ryan Marrick that we're also kind of thinking, should he play back so that he can get into the team? Somewhere along the line, Jack Williams quietly became a very strong key forward prospect for us up forward. And you got Allen, then you got Waterman. So if Shanahan wants games next year, which maybe that's possible, it probably has to be as an intercepting defender. And to be honest, I would be excited by that. And if he becomes a forward later in his career, so be it. But I think we could do a lot worse than him becoming a key back. And at 195 centimetres, he's already the same height as McGovern. There's no concerns there.
And then there was two picks after that I was really excited about. And that was my boy, Tom Gross, who I think is the perfect foil to Harley Reid. And Luca Gregor, who we talk quite a bit on this show as well, of someone that just is that kind of what-if player. And I'm an obsessed man, Jesse, of players that have learned other games. And he's a rugby league player. And I love that ability to be just learn a different game, and then you can complement it. They're two prospects, I think, particularly Tom, who is probably, in my opinion, going to be a top 15 when we redo this draft in 10 years' time. I think he's just had a real down year and people have forgotten about him.
Well, that's awesome to hear as an Eagles fan. And, I knew enough about Tom. I was aware of him and thought he looked pretty good. But I knew enough to think that he was probably going to go top 30. So another one of these examples where West Coast picked up a guy like that had dropped down the draft order. He's fairly small, but I think he seems to be quite a competitive guy, and he's got some tricks. He's got some forward craft. I already needs to lower his eyes a little bit more going inside 50, and his polish can be a little bit off. But one interesting link between all of our recruits, not just this year, but for a while now, has been a competitiveness. And Luca Gregor is probably the classic example of that in this batch. Players that are fast, strong, and athletic, but lack polish has been something that West Coast has been recruiting for some time. And you include Bo Allen in that. He doesn't have the polish, but he's a powerful athlete. He's strong, he's competitive, he's determined. And I think that really aligns with the brand that seems to be what West Coast are looking at. Even before McQualter, like I think Simo, under that reign, we started to go that way. Our game plan started to be geared towards that. But it's really reflected in our drafting this year. And there's something in common with all the draftees.
And then you picked a guy that plays like he's a mature age, Hamish Davis, who I think everyone had going to Fremantle OU. I think this was incredibly late because I thought his waffle form has been impeccable. Another very intelligent player, and I commented, you've got all guys who use the ball pretty well, have high footy IQ. It does feel like a return to vintage West Coast Eagles that play hard, but also play smart. That must excite you going into 2025, that you seem to be buying players for a certain style that's about to be unleashed.
Yeah, absolutely. It's nice to think we have a plan. One thing I like about Hamish too is that he's got some serious running power, and I think that's something West Coast has lacked on field big time lately. If you look at a lot of the numbers, there were games where we'd be in the game if it was a contested style game, but uncontested ball, West Coast would just not feature. As soon as the ball exited the stoppage, we didn't have anyone accumulating. Our outside mids were Gaff and Campbell Chesser and Luke Edwards, and so we just didn't have any runners outside. And I was going to say Hayward, that's who he's compared to, but Hamish Davis, he might start as a high half forward, or he could be a wingman. Kind of has a little bit of the Andrew Embley vibe from back in 2006. Some running power. I think there's a chance that he finds his way into the team earlier than expected, despite being picked 65, because there's a need there. And secondly, as well, he's done it, at Waffle Seniors level and is relatively ready-made. So he's one that I'm happy we got at 65 for sure.
And all in all, moving into 2025, obviously the bookies, the pundits, all have you in that bottom echelon of teams. As a West Coast Eagle fan, what are you looking for, though, next year? Like, what is it just another year, just get through it, get games into the kids? Or do you think you can spring a surprise? Because I don't think your list is as bad as performances were last year.
I think that's fair to say. And I think anytime you lose your coach, it kind of implies that the expectations were higher than what was produced. So that stacks up. And if you just look at the dichotomy between our best performances last year and our worst, like West Coast at its best, we're 11 goals up against Fremantle at three-quarter time when they were looking like one of the form sides of the comp. What we did against Melbourne when Harley kicks goal of the year, like a really strong team performance. It's hard to reconcile that with some of the games. I think the week after we lost to Adelaide by 100 points and just some lackluster performances towards the end of the year. So I guess to answer your question, what am I hoping for? Is that gap's tightened up. If we don't have, an 11-goal derby win, like I'll probably live with that. But, it was about 12 or 11 weeks in a row we just sat through and waiting for West Coast to do something. It wasn't that we were inconsistent. It was that we were like lifeless. So if we can tighten that up, I'm not delusional. I know we're going to have some bad games next year. But if we can, avoid a 12-week patch where we don't seem to fire at shots, then that will be some progress. Bearing in mind, we are still turning the list over. We got 23 under 22 or 23 under 21 now. So there's going to be some growing pains, etc. I'm fine with that. But if we can play with some heart, show some good signs, I don't really care where we finish as long as it's not 18th.
And I suppose before we let you go, Jesse, the big story is no one's talked about, you've just accumulated some good picks next year. And there is a certain Mr. Chad Warner who has been spotted playing golf over in Perth with all the West Coast delegates. Do you see, and I mentioned this about North in my review of North, do you think that maybe you've attacked the draft with these picks and next year we could see two names come across and suddenly we're there? Because Chad Warner, for me, I think should be the most sought-after player. Goal-kicking mids are as rare as rocking horse poo. Him and Harley Reid for 5-6 years does sound, on paper, game-changing.
100%. West Coast has it depends on your perspective, but maybe unfortunate recent history of trading big for established WA midfielders. We went large for Tim Kelly, and I think the mistake we made there was probably just misreading our list position. We were probably just over the edge. And I'll look, without getting into that, I support the club's, roll the dice there. With Chad, I don't think there's any risk of us misreading where we're at. Like, he's a young guy, and he will help, he'll form a huge part of, the offensive part of our midfield. We've got Harley, we've got Chad, and we've got Elijah, who I also really rate. I've started first naming players now. Once you're over 30, you can do that. But once we've got that, I think, we've probably potentially formed the top end aspect of our midfield, and there's still a lot to add around that. But once you've got some top end guys who are in the right age bracket, you can feel a lot more comfortable about the projection of the list. So I would fully support a move for Chad Warner. It does come at a cost, obviously, and it could be a significant one. But we hold 2 first rounders next year, and Sydney have some academy boys as well. And without getting too nitty-gritty into it, if we can somehow hold a first-round pick next year and trade for future ones, and we get Chad Warner, then I think we've done a lot of the legwork to get this list back to where it needs to be. And suddenly we'll have Chad Warner and Harley Reid on our team. And I think that would be an exciting time to be an Eagles fan.
It does sound exciting on paper, and I think he's a terrific footballer. I'm surprised there isn't more clubs sniffing around him to try and lure him not back to West Coast, but say, look, come here, play in the big lights of Melbourne. He is. He destroyed Carlton when we played him. Let's be honest. He broke my heart. I haven't seen a player play that well against my team for a long time.
Yeah, he destroyed a few clubs, if that makes you feel any better. He did pretty well in the Brownlow, young Chad. It'd be great to see him. I do think there's a lot of truth to the idea that he wants to come home. So we just have to beat Fremantle's signature if that's true. And we might be in the right place at the right time. He's going to cost a fair chunk of salary, but hopefully Fremantle spent it all on Shea Bolton and can't really move for him.
Indeed. But I mean, Jesse, you're obviously flying back home. I've been here so long now, Australia is home. So you're leaving my old home, coming to my new one. What have you got planned though, content-wise, up to Christmas, Jesse? Let the people know all your details are there. I'm sure everyone is sub, but if you aren't, go and see him. But Jesse, what are you up to in the off-season?
Look, I'm not going to lie. It's going to be a little bit of a quiet one as I readjust to life back in Western Australia, rolling into a 9-to-5 job in about 72 hours from now, maybe a bit more. So I do have some content planned, but I sort of don't know what will be the case until I get there. Where am I living? How easy is it for me to film content? So it'll be a quiet summer, but I will be back in 2025 on both True Footy and True Eagle, and looking forward to getting to some Eagles games again. It's been too long.
I'm looking forward to it, and maybe there'll be a vlog next year, you and me on a few beers, and we'll treat the people to see what you've learned back in my country at drinking beers.
I would love that, mate. Sounds fantastic.
Cheers, Jesse. Thank you very much, and we'll see you next time.
I see her rolling up, Uber black Cadillac, high heel boots and a sexy body full of tats. Baby's bad, oh baby's hella